Hey everyone, this is Steven Robles from Apple Insider, and this is our iPad mini review. All right, so we're going to get into all the details and specs of the device in a moment, what it's like to use, and maybe even who should buy this device. But I do want to say, every once in a while, Apple comes out with a product where it actually delights you as a user. The last time I can remember something like that is the AirPods. Using those first generation AirPods, seeing them set up and just practical day-to-day use, they're really a delight to use, and it changes how you use your devices or how you listen to music and podcasts. And the iPad mini has an element of that delight. It's a form factor that I've actually never owned. I have not had an iPad mini before. And so this being my first iPad mini with this redesign with the flat edges and the edge-to-edge screen, it actually really is a different experience of using this device as opposed to Apple's other products or even Apple's other iPads. So the brand new iPad mini 6th generation from Apple now has the same design as the iPad Air and the iPad Pros. So the new iPad mini 6 has an 8.3-inch screen and about the same body size as the previous iPad mini. Some upgrades though over the previous model and even the iPad Air is the 12-megapixel front-facing camera, which now has that center stage support. You don't get center stage on the iPad Air. You get center stage on pretty much every other iPad now, even the new 9th generation base model iPad. The new iPad mini has 2 speakers that'll give you stereo in landscape mode, has 4 gigabytes of RAM, and it comes with 64 gigabytes of memory. You can upgrade that to 256 gigabytes. Unlike the iPad Air though, you don't get a blue or green color. It just has the 4 colors. But what makes the mini special is the size. It's a smaller screen, but packs the same A15 Bionic processor as the iPhone 13, which is 1 generation chip newer than the iPad Air 4. That has the A14 Bionic. So this has the same processor as the iPhone 13, and we'll get into the performance in a second. The other thing that's interesting about this screen size, though, is the pixel density. So if you look at the iPad Air and even the iPad Pro, those have 264 pixels per inch. But the iPad mini, with its screen resolution, actually has 326 pixels per inch. Because the new iPad mini has that higher PPI count, the first thing you notice is how small things are when I first took it out. When I first unboxed it, first of all, the size of the device is great. I mean, I love the small size, it's super light, but I noticed that the screen almost seemed like really small. All the icons were small, the text was small. So this was actually the first Apple device where I knocked the text size up 1 notch, and I actually did the large icon setting rather than the small icons. Now, depending, you might like the smaller stuff, small text, small icons, but for me, it made me feel a little old, but I made them bigger, made the text bigger, and it's a much more legible device. I do think it's interesting too that on this iPad mini, you can actually put up to 16 apps in the dock, but it gets very, very small at the bottom with 16 apps. It looks a little better in landscape, but for me, I'll probably be putting more things on the home screen as opposed to keeping them in the dock. Now, you do have Touch ID as opposed to Face ID on the iPad mini. I've been using the iPad Pro since 2018. This is actually my first mini and the first iPad I've had with the Touch ID in the sleep button. I like the Touch ID, but there are some times where I do miss the Face ID. Sometimes I tap the screen and expect it to just unlock automatically, but it's not going to do that. You have to put your finger on the top and unlock it with the Touch ID. You get used to it. It works really fast. It works well, but I do miss Face ID sometimes. What's also interesting about the iPad mini are the volume buttons. So the volume buttons are now on the top edge along with the Touch ID and sleep button, but they actually change function depending on how you have it oriented. But if you rotate it into landscape, it'll actually change, and if you do it upside down, it'll change as well. Some people might not like that the volumes do different things at different orientations, but I found it's pretty intuitive, and it tries to follow the way the volume bar would actually increase as you're hitting the buttons. So I'll talk about the actual experience of what it's like to use it in a moment, but just to give you an idea of performance, again, it uses the A15 Bionic like the iPhone, but it actually gets a little bit lower Geekbench score when it comes to single and multi-core processing speeds. It does get higher than the iPad Air, which makes sense. iPad Air is using the A14, this is using the A15, but then there's a significant difference between this and the M1 iPad Pros. So that's the technical specs, but what is it like to actually use? Well, it's fine. It's noticeably slower in some tasks, especially if you're going to try and export photos from Lightroom. I've been exporting podcasts in Ferrite, and there's a noticeable difference between the M1 iPad Pro and this. But probably for what you're going to be using the iPad mini for, that kind of performance difference is probably not going to bother you too much. There'll probably even be more difference if you're doing video production and rendering or exporting in LumaFusion. So for most of the tasks you'll probably be doing, the performance should be fine. But let's talk about screen size. So performance, you can multitask, you can do side-by-side apps, you can do slide over, just like on all the other iPads. But because it's a much smaller screen, I actually found myself not wanting to do side-by-side or even slide over. Again, text can be very small, which you can adjust in accessibility, but it just found like the screen got very crowded very fast. So typically I'll use it in kind of a one app mode unless I really need to just drag and drop or pull something from another app. Now the iPad mini 6 has an LCD display. And so if you have other modern Apple devices, LCD is one of the older technologies. If you have one of the new iPhone 13 or 13 Pros, those have an OLED screen, which has those really deep and rich blacks. If you have one of the new M1 iPad Pros, the 12.9-inch version, that has a mini LED display, which again has really great contrast, really deep black levels. So as far as a quality of screen, it's not going to be the same as those devices. You probably won't notice it in day-to-day use, and especially if you're not holding them side by side. But if you're watching a movie or you're used to watching things on a mini LED screen or even an OLED screen, you will notice a difference. Movies have a really deep, rich blacks and good contrast on those devices. And on the iPad mini, it's a little washed out. You get more dark gray than really black colors when you're watching things or you're editing photos. So again, the screen is not the best of the Apple lineup, but it is really, really good. It has the same brightness as the iPad Air, and I didn't have any trouble using it outside. Whether I was watching a movie or editing something in Fairlight, I was able to see the screen no problem. It can be glary depending on where you are, and if you're in direct sunlight, you're going to be fighting that trying to watch the screen. But overall, I found the display to be plenty bright in pretty much any scenario. Now, one of the things you might have been hearing about the iPad mini is the jelly scrolling, or a varying refresh rate from one side of the screen to the other. Now, I compared this to the iPad Pro M1, which has a ProMotion display. The iPhone 13 Pro also has ProMotion as well, which is one of the best displays you can get on an Apple device. Now, if you slow down and record the iPad mini, you can definitely see this jelly shift in scrolling. One side of the screen has to play catch up to the other side of the screen. But if you look closely, even at the M1 iPad Pro that has a ProMotion display, slow it down enough, you can actually see that jelly effect even on the iPad Pro. So yes, if you really look for it and you try to scroll up and down really fast on the new iPad mini, you're going to see that jelly scrolling effect if you really look for it. But if you just use the device in whatever way you want to, either taking notes, watching movies, reading a book, that jelly effect scrolling is not really going to affect you at all, and you're probably not even going to notice it unless you really look for it. On the other hand, my main iPad since it came out has been the iPad Pro, which has had ProMotion for several years. And now the iPhone 13 Pro has a ProMotion display as well. So while the jelly effect really didn't bother me as much, I did notice the lack of ProMotion on the display. Now, I'm not doing a ton of things that would make a difference in ProMotion. Now, if you're into gaming and you want kind of those higher refresh rates, it might affect you. But again, if you're using this for taking notes, reading, or watching movies and TV shows, it really shouldn't bother you. Another nice update to the iPad mini is it now has the USB-C port on the bottom. This is not a Thunderbolt 4 port, you only get that on the new iPad Pro. But with the USB-C port, you can use USB-C hubs, you can do HDMI out, USB-A, connect external hard drives, and you have all the flexibility that you have on the iPad Air. Now, speaking of accessories and peripherals, the new iPad mini does support the second generation Apple Pencil. It connects right on the side and is almost the full length of the new iPad mini. But I love that it supports this pencil. It's a huge upgrade over the first generation Apple Pencil, and I use the pencil the most for actually editing podcasts like the Apple Insider Podcast and HomeKit Insider. And editing podcasts on this device is an interesting experience. Now, most podcasts that I edit, it's only 2 tracks, maybe 3 at the most. And so with this screen real estate on this screen size, you can do 2 tracks and it's okay. I'm going to be spending a couple weeks editing several of the weekly podcasts, and I'll see how it feels over time. But you can do it. And so if you want something that's ultra portable and ultra light to do some of those tasks, even like editing a podcast or maybe editing some photos in Lightroom, it can certainly do it, and it's no slouch. You can also get the smart folio case that Apple is selling. It comes in multiple colors. I got the dark cherry one here. I like how it looks, and it still keeps a really slim form factor on the iPad, and it has that origami type fold over where you can use it as a stand and watch something. On an airplane, this would probably be a great device, or again, just at a coffee shop. Now, there is no magic keyboard for the iPad mini, and it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's a very small device. If there was a keyboard attached to this device, it would probably be untypable. Now, you can use any Bluetooth keyboard with this, including Apple's Magic Keyboards, just not the smart connector ones, which this iPad mini does not have a smart connector on the back. So no smart connector accessories, which third-party manufacturers really haven't made a lot of smart connector accessories, so you're not missing a lot there. But again, you can use Bluetooth keyboards, mice, or trackpads. One of the other use cases you probably want an iPad mini for is reading. If you read a lot of eBooks and you'd like something that's very light, you can hold for a long time, the iPad mini is great for eBook reading. But when you go outside, it becomes less great. You can still use it outside and you can change the different backgrounds and see which one works the best for you. The brightness level, it gets bright enough, but if you're outside and you're in direct sunlight, and that's maybe a majority of the time how you read books outside, maybe you like going to the beach or sitting by the pool. If you compare it to an e-reader like the Kindle Paperwhite display or the e-ink display really is still the king of the outside reading. There's no glare, there's no reflection, you don't have to worry about brightness. So if outside reading is your priority, it's a majority of what you do, the Kindle is still probably the best option for that. But if you read indoors, coffee shops, and you only read outside occasionally, the iPad mini could be that e-reader for you. If you're into comic books, this would be great for comic book reading as well. For an extra $150, you can get the iPad mini in a cellular version. It does have 5G cellular, but no 6 gigahertz and higher bandwidth. So there's no mmWave or that super fast 5G speeds that you might get in a few places here in the States. It doesn't have millimeter wave. But if you want cellular, you can do that, and it is 5G, opposed to the iPad Air, which does not have 5G right now. So who is this device for? It starts at $499 for 64 gigabytes. Most people should probably upgrade to 256, so that's now $650 for an iPad mini. If you want to get cellular, that's an additional $150. So you could be at $800 already for an iPad mini. So what is the benefit? If your main purpose is reading ebooks and going outside is something you even remotely want to do, I think I would still recommend looking at the Kindle devices. Amazon is updating their Kindle device with USB-C and updated display, and it's probably a much more compelling device if e-reading is your sole purpose for a device of this size, and the Kindle is significantly cheaper. But if you want a device where you can take handwritten notes in the field, or you're one of the use cases that Apple talked about, like a pilot or in the medical field, and you want a small device to put in a lab coat, it does fit in some pockets, so you could do that. Maybe this is the device for you. And again, it's an iPad. So you get iPadOS 15 and it can do pretty much everything any iPad can do. So if you do want an e-reader, but you also want all those other things, you maybe want to do a little bit of productivity, some work, some drawing, some note-taking, this can do it all. And so maybe the iPad mini is for you. But which iPad should you choose? Is the iPad mini the right decision? Should you go with the iPad Air? Or maybe even the iPad Pro? Now, I don't personally have one of the new iPad Airs, but I used an 11-inch iPad Pro from 2018 till now, so about 3 years, and then I updated to the big 12.9-inch M1 iPad Pro. It's the only iPad with a mini LED screen, and it has the 16 gigabytes of RAM because I got the 1 terabyte model. So what iPad should you get? If you don't have any iPad at all in your possession, and you're considering buying your very first iPad, I think I might have to recommend the iPad Air over the Mini. It is $100 more, it starts at $599, but that 11-inch screen size will allow you to do a lot more, it won't feel cramped, and I just think it'll be more useful for you as your only iPad. If you're looking for a secondary iPad, or maybe you have a Mac or an older iPad lying around that's larger, like the 11-inch or even 12.9-inch, and you want to just get a newer iPad device that you might use just for entertainment or a majority of the time for reading and movies, then I think the iPad mini is a good decision. It has a beautiful design, it really is fun to use, but it would not want to be the only iPad I have. I still do a lot of productivity work on the 12.9-inch. I might end up still editing podcasts on that larger screen just because of the screen real estate in general. But when it comes to reading, browsing the web, reading the news at night in bed, this is going to be my device. It's so light so you can hold it for a long time, even over your head without fear of falling on your face and maybe breaking your nose. And it's just so much easier to handle, carry around. And if you want something ultra portable, that's the iPad mini. And it's a great device for all those use cases. So if you have an iPad, even an older iPad, and you're looking to get something new and you really like the small form factor, or maybe you're one of those specialized cases like a pilot, someone in the medical field, or someone that's on the road a lot or in the field a lot that takes a lot of handwritten notes, you prefer to do that, then the iPad mini is a great decision. Get it with the 2nd generation Apple Pencil, and I think you'll really love the device. You can read even more details about our iPad mini 6 review on appleinsider.com. There'll be a link in the description below. And don't forget, you can listen to all the podcasts that we have on Apple Insider. I host the Apple Insider weekly podcast that comes out every Friday. HomeKit Insider, where we talk about smart home and HomeKit devices, that comes out every Monday. I host that with Andrew O'Hara, and we have the Apple Insider Daily Podcast as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the Apple Insider YouTube channel. We have a bunch of videos going up about the iPhone 13 and 13 Pro, iPad mini. And again, we still have a lot of fall season left. We're probably going to see those M1X MacBook Pros. So you definitely want to subscribe and not miss a video. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.